Ms. Mallon? Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Mallon or Malo?
I'm not sure. I just got that last name. I got it a few months ago. So. Okay, I'm not sure. It's okay. Either is okay.
And you heard our delegation procedures earlier this evening?
I have.
Okay.
Clarifying question first before I get started. I am talking about stuff that I know is controversial. I've tried really hard to take an approach in the middle so that we're not going to touch anything that people will be sensitive to, that it doesn't cross any human rights concerns. But if something should happen and I do get stopped, will my clock be stopped at that point?
It will be paused. It will be stopped while the point of order is happening.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Whenever, and you do not have a PowerPoint, so whenever you're ready.
I do not. Trustees, board administrators, and our WRDSB community, thank you for receiving my delegation this evening. I am here tonight to share thoughts in response to the open letter issued by WRDSB. Tonight, I'll explore a topic contained within gender identity in our schools and creating safe spaces for all students. I offer my perspective to help this board make decisions amongst differing opinions. As a transgender individual, I empathize with students struggling with gender dysphoria, and my desire is to see all students succeed. I believe this is the shared goal amongst all of you board members as well as our teachers and administrators. I am worried about the widespread use of queer theory as the only way to understand transgender matters within our schools. Queer theory is a way of thinking about gender, sexuality, and identity that emerged in the late 20th century and argues that gender and sexuality are not fixed, but rather exist on a spectrum. Not all transgender individuals nor practitioners agree with this approach, and there are other models for interpreting sex and gender. WRDSB policies, however, suggest that the acceptance of transgender students is possible only by convincing all staff and students that queer theory is the only option for interpreting the relationship between sex and gender. I believe that we can respect and support transgender students without forcing any particular way of thinking. This is better for all students, including those who are transgender. I attended a high school not unlike those in Waterloo Region, but in an era when the word transgender was spoken only through innuendo. I was 12 years old when I came to understand that the debilitating feeling I had always felt had a name, gender dysphoria, though at that time the DSM-4 called it gender identity disorder. I was rooted in an evangelical Christian family who was amidst a resistance to the legalization of gay marriage. Coming out was not an option, neither was childhood transition. My solution was to proceed through an undesired male puberty, bury my identity within a bubble of repressed shame. I told no one about my identity until I was 18, and I agonized over transitioning with counselors and mental health professionals for a decade until a failed divorce, a family breakdown, and suicidal ideation brought me to accept that transition was my only path forward. I have since come to realize that transitioning was possibly the best decision that I have ever made. Years later, I am now the parent of a WRDSB student. My daughter is not mine by birth. I was blessed to adopt her under my care during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was terrified when my daughter started at KCI. I wanted my daughter to make friends, and I feared that once her classmates discovered she had a transgender mother, she might not be accepted. I worried that this would drive a wedge between her and I, and that she might come to resent my identity. I had no idea how radically different. I just lost my spot. I had no idea how radically different transgender acceptance within our schools had become since the days I attended. In fact, soon after my daughter started at KCI, I came to discover that holding a diverse identity was not just acceptable now, it's sought after. Being a transgender mom was considered cool amongst her classmates and friends. I had nothing to fear, at least for myself. WRDSB has been broadly successful in fostering accepting environments for transgender students. There is certainly still improvements to be made, but the fight against the stigmatization of transgender identities is hugely beneficial for children like little me. But we cannot ignore that the reduction of stigma has also led to the adoption of diverse gender identities for reasons that span beyond dysphoria. Transitioning will be the right path for some WRDSB students. It will not be an easy path, and it will be bound with life-altering drawbacks. Speaking from my own lived experience, surgery and hormones are expensive, medically risky, and only go so far in transitioning one's body. Having spent thousands of dollars on the best part of a year on a yet unsuccessful fertility treatment, I can say with firsthand experience that infertility is not something to be shrugged off lightly. The intersection of transition with families, friendships, and religious communities can be devastating. When transitioning, one often sets their sights on a world where they are affirmed as the gender for which they identify. But the reality is that many will come to discover that they don't pass convincingly as their affirmed gender, which has implications not just on social interactions, but even more poignantly on their own ability to accept themselves. Those of us who have transitioned know that it is a life-saving intervention for those who are deeply dysphoric and for whom less invasive interventions have proven ineffective, but it should not necessarily be someone's first go-to option. In WRDSB's open letter, you have stated that you do not encourage, convince, or convert students' beliefs about their gender. I believe this statement to be naive. I don't think our teachers have an intention to encourage transition, but when fostering acceptance, no procedures have been put in place to ensure well-meaning acceptance does not result in leading non-gender dysphoric children down a transition path that might not be right for them. When we discuss gender identity in the classroom, do we present a tempered understanding of transition complete with its risks and consequences? As many teachers have attested, it's challenging to discuss gender identity in a manner promoting acceptance and dignity for transgender individuals and not leave students with an overtly idealized perception on the real-world implications of adopting these identities. Current WRDSB procedures in place do an effective job of provisioning acceptance and dignity, but include no safeguards to ensure well-meaning acceptance does not drift into the territory of encouragement. Both our staff and students would be better protected if steps were taken to avoid encouragement. To simply assert that nothing a teacher does in the classroom could possibly result in the encouragement or the adoption of diverse identities seems to be speaking towards an intention, but not a reality. We can do better. Our children deserve it. While embracing transgender students, have our schools remained responsive to the impact on the non-transgender majority? There's so much nuance intertwining these matters, but from what I've observed, the message to non-transgender students is focused solely towards a duty to avoid anything that might be deemed transphobic at all costs. Within my daughter's school, acceptance of transgender individuals does not mean to be kind and inclusive. Rather, it requires adhering to expectations of decorum defined solely in terms of what a prototypical transgender individual apparently desires. She has been left with the impression that making a mistake with names or pronouns or anything else gender-related is to commit an unforgivable grievance for which she will be punished. This is not what I have taught her about accepting someone's gender identity. A few months ago, my daughter was washing her hands in the washroom when another student entered. My daughter was aware of the student's presence and she could feel that she was being watched. After a short while, the student, still standing at the doorway, said hello. My daughter turned around but was confused, as the individual that she saw was not someone who she had instantly identified to be a girl. My daughter said, "I think you have the wrong washroom," and the individual instructed her that they were trans. As my daughter told me the story that evening, she burst into tears. She was ashamed she had made this mistake. But what she felt even more than that was fear. She was afraid that the student might report her to the office and she would be in big trouble. She was terrified that at school the next day, if her principal had found out that she had made this mistake, then she would be derided as transphobic. If any student has a holistic understanding of what it means to be transgender, my daughter is that student. She has dated a trans boy, and she has many friends who are gender diverse, but that just scratches the surface. Her role in my transition has given her a rare vantage point into both the pain and the beauty transition can entail. She embodies an acceptance that is not preoccupied with flags, virtue signaling, or nitpicking language. She shows acceptance through love, not through educating herself in queer theory. I have been that person who gets called out in the washroom, and I feel for both that child and also for my daughter. Being transgender means facing this often. But the loneliest part of the transgender journey is that most people do not want to engage with me simply because they're worried that if they make a mistake, they will be called out. The DEI industry has created so many rules about how everything should be said, and it's terribly difficult to navigate for anyone who isn't a DEI consultant. What if we focused a little less on teaching children a very specific set of ideas about how to perceive their own and others' genders, and just taught them to love? Why is my daughter so afraid of being transphobic at school? What are we doing to recognize the complexity of identity and foster a safe environment for all students? Are we actually preparing transgender students for the reality of the world they will face when they leave our schools? I'll leave you with this. I was mistakenly referred to as he in this very boardroom last month by someone who I know holds the best of intentions towards me. I could focus on the pronoun that was used, or I could focus on the love that lied behind the interaction. What if that was the resilience that we taught our students in the classroom? That we don't need to create it to mean so much. That to accept transgender classmates is to include them and to love them, nothing more and nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation. Questions of clarification, Trustee Woodcock?
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just want to thank you. And I'm sorry that your daughter went through that experience. And I just want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. And if I can just comment on that, I'm glad that she did. It was a great opportunity for us to have a conversation, and there were lots of tears from both of us, and we both learned from it. So I'm glad for her, but I'm also concerned when my daughter's probably one of the students who's best prepared to handle those situations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Ramsey, question of clarification?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the delegation, thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned about improving the understanding, and not exactly your word, but improving the understanding of amongst the majority student population. Do you have any suggestions at all how that could be done? Could you elaborate a little bit as to how, from your lived experience and so forth, how that could be done to make things more positive then? Or
I don't think that's a clarification. I think that's asking for more information, Trustee Ramsey. So
What I
let's
will say is I
focus
can send
on,
you some things.
there you go. She can send you an email. There we go.
And it's okay. I can deal with
Trustee
that.
Watson?
Okay, Madam Chair, that's I have a request then also then, please.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Trustee
Okay.
Watson, question of clarification?
Well, I just want to refer all of that information to staff. And I know you were going to do it,
But I also have a request though.
but I'd like to refer all that information to staff, and then staff can report back to your concern through that. So.
Okay, can I have a second to refer this to staff? Trustee Ramsey? Okay, all in favor of referring this to staff? Okay, thank you. Okay, that's unanimous. Just a bit of delay online there. Okay, thank you, Trustee Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not a question. I'm just wondering, with the consent of the delegation, I wonder if her remarks could be reflected in the minutes verbatim. In other words, it being shared and be reflected in the board minutes. Just a simple request, verbatim, word for word, what is was presented to us.
Okay, our minutes are not usually verbatim, so I'll look to the board and see if that's what they would like. So would there be a second for that? Trustee Watson, thank you. Trustees, all in favor of having verbatim this delegation in the minutes? Okay, question. Okay, we have some questions. Okay, Trustee Meisner, go ahead. You have a
We
question?
have had a delegate who has passed on their information to us through an email. I mean, I would appreciate it. I don't know if we need to have it reflected in the minutes. I think if you send it out, we have the opportunity to read it. No, we have something to consider.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Johnson?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, something to the fact to discuss this. I appreciate your presentation.
Yeah.
So thoroughly thought through, brought up many things. I think what we have in place is probably good at this point, because in a way it's sort of like stepping away from the purpose of our minutes and including it, but the message has been heard and will be received and shared with many people. I think we've done a really good job of that.
Okay, anyone else on this topic? Trustee Ramsey?
I just have again, it's just a procedural question because I thought that past practices has not been very recent, but we can ask, and others that's been on the board for a while, we can ask that something be reflected in the minutes verbatim. Yes, it's not our practice to have verbatim stuff, but upon request for future reference, I think it's appropriate to ask. I'm not even sure why it's subjected to a vote, asking for a presentation to be reflected in our minutes for future reference. That is there as a record of exactly what was said, because I think it's very important what was said. Not to say that other stuff is not important, but this particular delegation is to the point on a lot of issues that are confronting the board.
Yeah, this is not whether something was important or not. I think this is outside our normal practice and what our minutes normally are. So I'm looking to the board for direction on this to see if they would like to include it. Trustee Woodcock? Did you have a comment? I thought I saw your hand go up.
Oh, I think you did. And yes, I'm one of those ones that have been around for a long time. I hate that when you look at me and you know, everybody knows I'm old. But at the same time, I'm thinking I would prefer to receive the delegation information. And then I'm worried about a precedent. Our minutes are going to become incredibly long over time. And I know it's a minimized. I do want to receive it, but I don't think I would put it in a minute.
Okay, seeing no further questions, the motion has been moved and seconded to have the delegates presentation verbatim in the minutes. So all in favor of that motion? Okay, thank you. And opposed? Okay, thank you. Trustee Woodcock?
Could I ask respectfully if the delegation would mind sharing their information with trustees, send it in an email, your presentation?
Ms. Mallett, would you be willing to do that?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your delegation this evening.
Thank you.